Just a quick question. Who's heard of the XZ backdoor? Okay, yeah. And out of curiosity, who's heard of reflections in trusting trust? Okay, so this was what I was hoping for, because if everybody put their hand up again, then this is kind of pointless. But my thinking is that this is something that was predicted 40 years ago, and reflections in trusting trust is that. But first things first, what I found interesting about the XZ backdoor when we started getting information about it is that you can't see the problem. You can't see it in the source code. There was a lot of social engineering going on, but the core thing from my perspective is that it was, one piece of code that was hidden in another piece of code, and the combination of the two created this backdoor out of something new. So there was actually a talk, an award-winning talk, called Reflections in Trusting Trust, and that was done all the way back in 1984. And it was a talk by Ken Thompson, and it kind of demonstrated something very, very similar to this. So the first thing I had to do when I kind of had this spark was I read about this thing maybe 15, 20 years ago. So where did I read it? And the answer is I read it on something called the hacker jargon file, which is a bit crusty, a bit old, but it's pretty cool. It's got some hacker folklore. I highly recommend The Story of Mel if you haven't read that one before. But it also has a glossary. And in there, under B, it has backdoor. And specifically, it mentions about Ken Thompson's Turing Award lecture, et cetera, et cetera. And if you follow that link, it doesn't work anymore. So you have to actually look it up and find it. And if you do, you'll see that Reflections on Trusting Trust, really interesting. And so what I want to quickly go over, standing on the shoulders of giants here, is what it is that he did. So he didn't just create a backdoor. He looked at creating a backdoor that would detect the Linux or the Unix login environment, and then allow him to create a new username and password, essentially, so that he could access that, he could bypass that, no matter who it was. But you can't just hide that in the source code. You can't modify the login page to do that. You have to do something a bit smarter. So he hid it in the compiler, so that when the compiler detects that it's compiling the Unix login page, it will insert the backdoor. So there's that obfuscation. But actually, you could go a bit smarter, and he did, which is that if you're now looking at the compiler's source code, well, you see there's a backdoor in there. So instead, let's add the backdoor into a compiler that compiles the compiler, right? Because we're bootstrapping. So if you add it to detect when the compiler is being compiled, then add the backdoor that will then detect when it's compiling the Unix into that compiler. Well, now we have a backdoor that's 2 layers deep, and if you just carefully distribute that compiler, over time it's going to spread like a virus, because he didn't just do that. He also made it so that the next build of the compiler would have the same exploit in it. So unless you're really looking at the assembly, or if you see, that SSH takes an additional half a second, then you're not going to be able to detect it. But some people would say, oh, well, that's not practical. It can't go any further than that. We would detect it, something like that. There's things in place. Well, actually, he had a moral. And in further conversation with, interviews with him, he brought up the fact that you can actually go deeper. You don't just put this in the compiler. You can actually put this into the hardware itself. And so when the hardware detects that it's compiling a compiler, it can inject it then. And in fact, you could go even further than that. You could go into the manufacturing plant that's building the hardware. So I just thought this was really interesting, and it was the thing that came to mind when I heard about the XZ backdoor. And when I searched online, the only other person I could find who thought the same thing was this one blog post. So cool, me too. And that's it.
Thank you very much.